Hello and welcome back to this Stamp Fatalistic Crusade. This will be a new book finds video. So these are some interesting books that I found in my usual haunting various used and local bookshops like I always like to do. I haven't been doing as much book hunting really since the pandemic, of course, and now that things are finally opening up more and more, I like to go in occasionally and peruse around some of our local bookshops, but I still have way too many books I haven't read yet. So and maybe some space concerns as well have kept me from going in as much as I usually do, but I can't say no to cheap books or books I've been really wanting to read. So this is a variety of different things, but as always, I'm always stunned at some of the really amazing finds that I can stumble across once I start really digging through book bins and going to bargain sections and such. So this is in sort of a loose order, but I guess I'll do all the paperbacks first. So have a variety of things, but this first one, this is actually one of my favorite authors, but I've never read any of his other science fiction work outside of Star Wars, unfortunately, because his stuff never really got reprinted all that much as far as I'm aware, and you really don't see his books, again, outside the Star Wars ones, in most used bookshops. So I always glance through occasionally trying to see if I could find any of them, but they finally had a pretty clean copy of one of Brian Daley's science fiction fantasy novels. So this is Requiem for a Ruler of Worlds. This is from 1985. I've never gotten to read this, but Brian Daley is one of my favorite authors simply from his Star Wars work. I think he's the greatest Star Wars writer ever. He, of course, wrote the entirety of the iconic NPR radio drama trilogy and also the initial Star Wars novels of they're typically called the Han Solo trilogy. So that's Han Solo at Star's End, Han Solo's Revenge, and Han Solo and the Lost Legacy. Those, I think, are the greatest Star Wars novels ever written. I think Brian Daley got the spirit of Star Wars better than anyone, even including George Lucas. So I've always wanted to read his other works, which he has a variety of science fiction and fantasy titles. So this is just going to be my first time reading one of his non-Star Wars works. I believe he also wrote the novelization for Tron as well, which I didn't know about, so I really want to find that now, being a novelization geek. And I adore his prose style. I think he was a fantastic writer, so I've always just wanted to check out his non-Star Wars fiction. Then I stumbled across some pretty darn clean original 80s paperback copies of Lynn Dayton thrillers. So this first one is Goodbye Mickey Mouse. I've read some Dayton novels. I, of course, came to Dayton primarily for the Harry Palmer films that I adore. That's why Funeral in Berlin is behind me. But, of course, in the Secret Files novel, as they're usually called, the spy character is unnamed. So Harry Palmer was created for the films, and so we all just call him Harry in the novels, even though he's not named. But Dayton's particular style of world-weary, grim sort of fusion, I'd say, of at least in those novels, sort of a fusion between John le Carre, Ian Fleming, and with good dashes of Raymond Chandler as well. It was just right up my alley. So I've always meant to read some of his later books. So, sorry, this has a nice gold foil for the title, so it's kind of catching the light a bit. But this was just a really nice paperback copy. They also had a very minty copy of Berlin Game, and again, this has the nice, very shiny foil embossing on the text, has the yellowed page edges, but it's just in absolutely perfect shape with a really glossy paperback cover. I love finding clean vintage paperbacks. Not only are they cheaper, but they just look fantastic. So they also had his next novel. I believe this is from 85, so this is Mexico Set. And then this kind of goes with Berlin Game as well as part of a mini sort of series run. So I've just always meant to read more Dayton, so these were great bargain finds. You can find a lot of Dayton novels pretty cheaply. Unfortunately, it's the Secret Files books, the Harry Palmer books that rarely pop up in bookstores, and then when they do, they're usually pretty trash. So I wound up getting the really cool reprints of those that were done a number of years ago with the matching covers. So if you want to read those, I would suggest checking out the Secret Files paperback run. So of course it's me, and of course I gravitate towards film books, and that includes movie tie-ins and novelizations and spin-offs. So I'd sort of known about these in this particular series, and it wasn't until recently that I found one or two of them. But I finally stumbled across a few more of the very tricky to find Universal Monsters paperback spin-offs. So this is volume 3, dealing with the Frankenstein legacy and the creature character. So basically these were books for young adults. It was supposed to be a sort of series that unfortunately never really went anywhere, but it's a cool attempt to do something with the classic monster characters. So each book takes some teenage characters and basically mixes them up with a particular monster character. So I guess you could say it probably was inspired a bit by the film The Monster Squad in that way. But it was a cool idea, and then they got some various young adult writers who had done some series work as well to write for them. But I also found book 5, also from around the same time, with Creature from the Black Lagoon. So these are in pretty good shape, and they were very cheap in the bargain section. You rarely stumble across these, so they're a nice little collectible piece. It is very difficult, of course, to find all of them. So actually, I think I have all of them but one now. So the others deal with the Wolfman, the Mummy, and of course Dracula as well. So they only did about 5 or 6 of these, and again, they're rather uncommon, but it's just a fun thing if you're a fan of the Universal Monsters, or if you loved reading series young adult fiction when you were growing up around this time period. So again, these rarely pop up, but I couldn't resist them for a few cents, and since I got some of the other ones and I'm such a fan of the classic Universal horrors, I thought these would be fun to try out as well. Now next are a number of 1970s or so era interesting paperbacks. Not all of these are film tie-ins, but this first one, it was literally in the bargain section, so it only cost me a nickel, but it's a pretty minty copy with some really interesting, unique artwork. So I did finally get a copy of the Anderson tapes, and I love the Sidney Lumet film from 1971, but this is a more vintage Dell paperback with this really very striking art on a black cover, and then you see the various figures represented in the actual audio tapes that were, being used to surveil every major character and further the paranoia theme of the film. So I just couldn't resist this really striking looking paperback. Even though it's got some creasing there, it's still in really nice shape and has the traditional green-edged Dell paper. So this is actually in much better shape than the later printing that I got not too long ago. So I couldn't resist this one, and I'll probably wind up gifting that other one to somebody. But again, the art just looked really great on this. Now, this one is a film tie-in. It's a book I've always wanted to read because I love the original 1956 film so much, and it's always in and out of print, so it's not always the easiest book to find. But they had a just incredibly mint condition copy, also from Dell, of the 1978 tie-in of Jack Finney's Invasion of the Body Snatchers. So this was printed to tie into the 78 Philip Kaufman remake that many people love. It's in immaculate shape. It's still got the gloss on the jacket, and of course the matching logo and some art to tie in with the 78 film. But this is the original novel, and again, because it's Dell, it's got the green edge papers. But again, it's just absolutely immaculate. So perfect binding, no creasing or anything. So the only thing is there's a little wear on the bottom edge. That's it. So this was just really incredible to find, and I've always wanted to read the original Jack Finney novel. If I'm remembering correctly, the original version was serialized in a magazine, and then I think he expanded it and slightly changed it for the novel version. So this is still technically different from any of the film adaptations, but I'm such a fan of the original Don Siegel film from the 50s that I've always wanted to read the book. Now, speaking of film and book tie-ins and novelizations, this is a film that is not very good. I'll just go ahead and admit it. I'm a huge John Frankenheimer fan, but even he admitted this film was not very good. However, I had no clue that there was a novelization, let alone who wrote it. So this is the novelization for the film Prophecy. That is a pretty well-known, not very good horror film. It came out in the late 70s, directed by John Frankenheimer. And but why I was interested in this, if you look here, This was written by David Seltzer, who wrote the fantastic novelization for The Omen, which is one of my all-time favorite novelizations. In fact, it's one of those novelizations that I kind of actually prefer to the film, and I love the film, and the film's great, but I really love what he did with that book. So I'm very curious to check out this. I know this is not a super common book to find, but that's why I got it, and even though it is pretty beat up, it's got some old sticker wear. It looks like somebody marked all over the cover in green marker, but I guess it kind of sort of works, but it's still in pretty okay shape. Like the actual pages and text block is fine, so I didn't mind, paying a quarter for this, even though it's in pretty rough shape. I'm just very curious to see. I don't really return to the film all that much. I know some people really love it, but even as a giant John Frankenheimer fan, it's not a good movie. It didn't work out well, so I'm just very curious to see what David Seltzer might have done with the same concept, because it is, it's a pretty thick book. It's, clocks in about 250 pages, so I'm just very curious to see what he did with this. I'd be very curious to see if it compares or stacks up to his Omen novelization. Speaking of The Omen, I also stumbled across they had a dirt cheap copy. It's not in the best shape, but again, if I see a cheap novelization, I'm like, well, I might as well. And again, I love the Omen novelization so much. They had the novelization for Omen 3, The Final Conflict. So this is one you don't see every day. It's got nice custom artwork. It's not by David Seltzer, but I'd be very curious to see again how this stacks up. This is one of those films where in the Omen films, I love the first one, and then the second one, there are some good things in it, and there are some good ideas in the third one, but unfortunately, I never feel it's anywhere near as effective as it could have been. So I'm very curious to see how the novelization handles the material. And like a good amount of novelizations, even though this isn't in the best shape and does have some browning of the pages, it does have some black and white, a black and white photo section. So here you can see Sam Neill is looking very not happy today, and they're of course all in black and white. So yeah, this was just simply a curiosity pickup. And then I was not even really aware of this particular book, but this was from 1985, and apparently somebody decided to try and continue with the series anyway. So here you have was credited as Omen 5, The Abomination. There was an Omen 4, but that was more of a made-for-TV film. And, of course, this is supposedly picking up on after Omen 3, if I'm understanding it correctly. But this is, again, credited as Omen 5. So, yeah, this was, again, just a simple curiosity pickup. It's in okay shape. But when I find books in the bargain section for a quarter or less, sometimes I just grab them for simple curiosity's sake. And this is all simply because I love the David Seltzer novelization of Omen 1 so much that I'm very curious. I was curious about Omen 3, and then this one just seemed like a complete, I had no idea this existed. So I will give this a try and see if it's any good. And then lastly, two novelizations from 1990s films that I grew up on that sort of helped introduce me to various characters. The films themselves don't have the best reputation, and I always wondered about the novelizations because both of these films had significant changes and things removed by the studio. So unfortunately on this first one, it seems to follow the actual film script in terms of the ending. But I finally found the novelization of the 1997 Saint film. This has the teaser art from the teaser poster. I still really like the film, and it was really what introduced me to the Saint character, that along with some reruns of the classic Roger Moore series. But I still want to read more of Leslie Charteris' original stories. But I always was curious to see if the novelization, I just picked this up, but I did skim through it. The film was significantly changed. It had a completely different third act and ending originally. It was a lot darker, and it was basically sort of an origin film setting up the character for sequels and more adventures that unfortunately never happened. But I guess test audiences didn't like it, so they made a softer ending and took the action climax out and changed the whole ending. It still works, and I still really enjoy the film, but I still think it's actually quite underrated. But I was very curious to see if the novelization had any of that stuff. So apparently it has the theatrical ending in here, but I'm sure as with most novelizations, there's some extra stuff here and there, and this is actually quite uncommon. It was not a very successful film, so and most of these novelizations at this time point only got one printing back right before the film came out, and that was it. So I've always wanted to find one of these and They're usually kind of pricey on eBay, so it was very cool to finally find a copy. And then the other, which I was also introduced to these characters via the film and reruns on, I guess primarily A&E it would have been, but I finally found one of the novelizations that has eluded me for an extremely long time. I found the book for the 1998 Avengers film. Now, this one I know for a fact has all the stuff that was cut out of the film. This film has a terrible reputation. I remember seeing it theatrically in mostly an empty theater, and of course, word of mouth had already gotten out. There's still some good things in it, but you have to know about how this film was treated. It was basically butchered and torn apart by Warner Brothers. The original edit has never been seen. There are glimpses of some of the deleted materials and trailers and stills. There is quite a decent fan campaign still to get the original director's cut released. The director himself has kind of talked about how the film just completely was, taken apart by a studio who really didn't understand it. So the only way to really get the full sense, or at least a fuller sense of how the film originally was, is to track down this novelization, which again only went through one print run and is very, very uncommon. I've nearly bought a copy on eBay many times, but I didn't feel like paying, $20 or $30 for a paperback from like one of the big thrift books companies. Well, not thrift books, but like, World of Books and one of those others where they just have a generic picture. And even if it says very good, you get a copy in the mail and it's just, just like a bag of pages in a destroyed book. So always tried to find one in a used shop and stumbled across this one in perfect shape. Still got a nice gloss on the jacket. Uses the poster art. But again, if you like anything in this film and you've not been aware of any of the studio meddling, you really need to try and find a copy of this book. It gives you a better idea of what the film was originally. It doesn't make the film perfect, but you can definitely tell it's much more of a love letter to the series as originally intended. And the film was basically recut by people who had no knowledge of what the film was even trying to do, or probably what the series even originally was. So this is one of the essential novelizations to find, simply to try and, in your head, piece the film back together that was just torn apart by a completely stupid studio. So I'm very happy to finally have this, and I can't wait to completely read through this thing and finally try and piece it together in my head via the novelization. So this next one is just a plain Dover thrift edition, but I realized I didn't have a print copy of this absolute classic, and being a Hitchcock nerd and a spy fiction nerd, I've then felt like I had been doing something wrong. So this was just a super cheap Dover thrift, more modern printing. I think this is from, let's see, probably the early 2000s. Yeah, 2010. So this is their more modern edition of the John Buchan classic, The 39 Steps, featuring the classic character of Richard Hannay, one of the great characters in all of espionage fiction. And of course, Hitchcock turned this into his 1935 British masterpiece film of the same name. But it does make significant changes. So if you love the Hitchcock film like I do, when you come to the original story, it is quite a bit different in a number of ways. So it's important to read this, and like most of Buchan's work, it is very much a real foundational work for what would later become known primarily as spy fiction or espionage fiction or adventure spy fiction, or however you want to classify the genre. But I just didn't have a print copy, and I'd been meaning to reread it for the longest time. And to be honest, Dover thrift editions, they are very inexpensive, but they usually have a little bit of notes, and the text block is, relatively clean. So I've never had a problem with Dover editions. The only thing is on older classics with different translations or different text editions, they are probably going to be using what is the most cheaply available public domain version. So you will want to check that as well. But, it's a little bit of a plain cover, but the sort of tinting looks okay. And again, this was just in the bargain section, so I finally have a print copy of the 39 Steps. This next one was a total surprise finding it for just in our local bookshop. I'm, of course, a giant fan of classic pulp adventure fiction, and grew up seeing various pulp style or adventure novels in various bookstores, but never knew where to start or never knew what was what. And that also extends to the sort of explosion that happened of the men's adventure paperback novel in the 60s, but primarily the 70s into the 80s. And so that also includes the Destroyer series, which I've always wanted to try. And of course, I've seen the Remo Williams film from the 80s that Guy Hamilton directed, which unfortunately is, it's a bit goofy and it's low budget kind of shows, but there are some fun little bits in there, and it is sort of an old fashioned pulpy type thing. So I was then even more curious to maybe try one of the novels. So the Forge printing group made this omnibus. So this is a trilogy titled The Best of the Destroyers. This brings together 3 of the original novels from the 70s with a custom introduction and custom art. It's a pretty nice little trade paperback. Well, it's not little. It's actually pretty hefty. So I figured this would be a great place to sort of get a taste of what the series is like. Again, I've never actually read one of these, but this was, again, I figured a great place to start, and has some introduction pieces and such. So hopefully get some context for the rest of the series, because, of course, this is a massive series that ran for many different decades. So you usually see a big stack of Destroyer novels in most bookstores because of that. But I figured since this was cheap and it's 3-in-1, I figured it was a good place to start. And again, the art looks pretty nice and the binding's really solid. So sometimes it's great to be able to start with something like this, so you can get a sort of feel for how it is in terms of the rest of the series, and see if you want to invest any time or money in seeking out more of them. And this one, I think, is probably my favorite find of recent bookstore hunting. I've always wanted to find all 3 of the trilogy in this particular edition once I got hooked on the radio dramas, but unfortunately, the books for the second and third films are very much more uncommon than the first one. But they had the beautiful paperback published NPR dramatization script by Brian Daley of the Empire Strikes Back radio drama. So this is in the same style as the Star Wars one, which I have. But unfortunately, like I said, the ones for Empire and Return of the Jedi are very uncommon. They're not necessarily rare, but if you're looking for these on eBay, say for example, you would pay $5 or $10 for Star Wars, but more like 10 to 20 for Empire, and probably a little more for Jedi, because that was made significantly after Star Wars and Empire. They were made in the 80s, whereas the Jedi radio drama wasn't made until the 1990s. In fact, I think 1996, if I'm remembering correctly. But if you've never been able to read the printed version of these, even if you're a giant fan of the radio drama like I am, so you have a full introduction, but you also get some little bits of art and some things they were coming up with to try and visualize the series as they went along. So it's broken up by episodes, and then it's the actual literal script. So it's broken up by character dialogue, but it reads and perfectly well due to the formatting and the spacing. So you can read one of these, and it's not like reading a script as much. It is much more, you can sort of completely get into it and then feel like you're reading an actual novel. But if you've never been able to experience the radio dramas, let's put it this way. If you've gotten burned out on Star Wars, if you feel like you can never get the original spirit that you had as a kid seeing the films, or if you saw the original film in 1977 and you never feel you can recapture that spirit, these do it, because they not only retell the stories of the films, but they expand upon things. They include all the deleted materials not in the original trilogy, but expand upon those as well. And again, Brian Daley as a writer, I don't think anybody else understood Star Wars to the same degree. I mean, Brian Daley, just to say that he nailed it is not even scratching the surface of how incredible the radio dramas are. I think these are definitive, and there are some aspects of the radio dramas I actually do prefer to the original trilogy films, as much as those are part of my very soul. So that's how important I think the radio dramas are, and that's why it's really cool to be able to have a physical version in your hands that you can read and just peruse over. I try to re-listen to the radio dramas once every year and a half or so, just like when I rewatched the trilogy. But this is just a marvelous way of coming to these. I know the CDs can be a bit pricey, so if you prefer reading, you can read these. But of course, the radio dramas are beautiful to just listen to at night with all the lights off and your eyes closed and everything, or you can read along with the published version. But this is just a really cool presentation, and the art included is really great, so you can actually just follow along with this if you want. But I'm just really happy to finally have the Empire book, so now I just have to find the Return of the Jedi one, which again is the hardest to find of the three. I guess for some reason they just didn't print as much of Empire and Jedi as they did Star Wars. Then to close out, I have 3 film-related biographies. This first one I'm really excited for, and I can't believe I found it in one of our bookshops. This is from Yale University Press, and this is from their Jewish Lives series, which has done a number of books on some key film personnel. This is a really interesting volume on Ben Hecht. So this has a similar design to other books in this series, a really nice textured cover, and then, of course, the sort of cut-edged, fancier pages. But this looks like a really great volume. I have read Hecht's autobiography a number of years ago, which is just fascinating. If you're not aware of who Ben Hecht is, he is one of the legends of screenwriting. He is arguably, quite possibly, the greatest screenwriter who ever lived. That's not overstating it. I mean, it's just a fact. Not just his credits, but even his script doctoring and things he was not credited for helping out on. He was an absolute legend. He's one of those names that enough people do not mention anymore. So I'm just really fascinated to check out this more modern biography of Ben Hecht. I also found another book by one of my all-time favorite biographers. This has a beautiful cover, so I couldn't pass it up. So this is James Curtis's book on the legendary William Cameron Menzies, one of the greatest production designers who ever lived, and who also became a pretty darn good director in his own right. But this is a gorgeous book. It looks very much like an art book. You can get this nice metallic printing quality on the actual title, and then these beautiful images on this very glossy jacket. So this is just a gorgeous looking cover. I can't wait to read this. Curtis wrote the amazing biography of James Whale, and then a phenomenal book on Spencer Tracy as well, in addition to a book on W.C. Fields. And I haven't got to read his book on Preston Sturges yet, but I'm really excited to. This is a really nice volume, again, with the sort of cut-edged pages loaded with stills. I mean, this is catnip for me. So I can't wait to read through this and just devour it. I'm sure it'll be just as good as every other biography that I've read of Curtis's, who is, without question, one of my favorite film biographers. And then I have another book on Gregory Peck, but this was in the bargain section as well. So this is the 2003 biography called A Charmed Life. I haven't read this one. I've read the other major Peck biography, You See Most Everywhere, a number of years ago. So I'll have to read this and then do a comparison between the two. It's always difficult when you have multiple biographies, to know which one is worth your time, or which one is better, or which one is more factual. But again, this was just in the bargain section, and if it's a film biography, I can't pass it up. So I'll be checking this out. I'm, of course, a giant fan of Peck's, and I'll compare this to the other biography of Gregory Peck that I have. So that's it for this particular book haul. This is just some of basically all the highlights that I found in my last month or so of rummaging through local bookstores and things like that. Even when I don't go to bookstores, they just seem to find me. So I can't turn down a cheap book or a free book especially. So I accumulate a lot of books, but at least that way I'm never bored, I guess. So, and as always, if you have any comments or questions, please leave them below. Any particular books you may have found in your local stores that you were really excited about. I always love hearing about what people get excited over, what they stumble across in bookstores, and so on and so forth. So as always, keep reading print books, keep supporting your local independent bookstores and your mom and pop bookstores, and of course even chain bookstores as well, because they need support too. Anything to keep bookstores in action and keep print books and in people's hands and available. And as always, keep reading.